Blanche Duncan was still holding the folded funeral program when Bentley's attorney calmly announced that her late husband had left his mistress $500,000. The room went silent. Savannah Pierce lowered her eyes and pretended to cry harder, but Blanche noticed the tiny smile trembling at the corner of her mouth. Then came Blanche's inheritance. Not the house, not the company she helped build, not even an apology. Just a sealed handwritten letter. Her fingers shook as she opened it. Please don't make a spectacle of yourself after I'm gone. Grace was always your role. Blanche read the line twice. Then she looked up at the woman wearing Bentley's watch and quietly reached for her phone. Graham, she whispered when the accountant answered. I think my husband left behind more than a mistress. If someone betrayed you even after death, would you protect their reputation or destroy everything they tried to hide? Let me know in the comments before we continue. The mansion in Greenwich had never felt this cold before. Not even during the winters Bentley insisted on spending in Connecticut, because New York people respected old money more when it came with snow-covered hedges. Tonight, every chandelier glowed gold against polished marble floors, while strangers carried crystal glasses and whispered condolences Blanche no longer believed were sincere. I'm so sorry for your loss. He was such a brilliant man. You two were the definition of a power couple. Blanche smiled automatically each time, the same controlled smile she had perfected over 20 years of marriage. Soft, graceful, non-threatening, the smile Bentley had trained into her. Outside, black SUVs lined the circular driveway, while Manhattan executives, hedge fund partners, and political donors drifted through the house like mourners attending a royal funeral instead of a dead financier's reception. Everything smelled like white roses and expensive perfume. Blanche stood near the staircase with one hand wrapped around a champagne flute she hadn't touched. Her black dress fit perfectly, her makeup was flawless. Her grief looked elegant enough to photograph. That was important to Margaret Duncan. Shoulders back, Margaret murmured as she approached her daughter-in-law. People are watching. Of course they were. Margaret looked immaculate in charcoal silk, not a single silver strand out of place in her perfect blonde bob. At 72, Bentley's mother still carried herself like a woman who believed emotions were embarrassing weaknesses poor people couldn't afford. You disappeared after the reading of the will, Margaret continued quietly. That was noticed. Blanche stared at her. My husband left $500,000 to his mistress. Margaret barely blinked. Yes, well, she said smoothly, Bentley was complicated. Complicated! Such a beautiful word for cruelty. Blanche let out a short laugh before she could stop herself. Margaret's eyes sharpened immediately. Do not lose composure tonight. There's a woman in my house wearing my husband's watch. Margaret lowered her voice further. And making a scene would only humiliate you more. Blanche felt something inside her shift, not break. Shift. Like ice cracking beneath still water. Across the room, Savannah Pierce stood beside the fireplace, surrounded by Bentley's business associates. Her cream-colored dress hugged her body softly enough to look innocent while still drawing every eye in the room. She looked devastated, performatively devastated. One manicured hand rested over her chest while she dabbed beneath her eyes with a tissue. Blanche recognized the performance because Bentley had loved performances. He loved appearances more than people. Savannah glanced up, then froze when their eyes met. For half a second, neither woman looked away. Then Savannah offered a tiny, sympathetic smile. Blanche's stomach turned, because there it was again. Bentley's Rolex. The stainless steel Daytona he once claimed had been misplaced during a conference in Chicago. She remembered helping him search their bedroom for it, while he snapped at her for creating stress over material things. Now it sat around Savannah Pierce's wrist, like a trophy. One of Bentley's colleagues approached Blanche carefully. "Mrs. Duncan Bentley spoke about you constantly. He adored you." Blanche almost asked which version of Bentley they knew, the charming keynote speaker, the generous CEO, or the man who once stared at her across their kitchen island and said, "You've become emotionally exhausting," after she asked why he missed their anniversary dinner. Instead, she smiled politely. "That's kind of you." Another woman leaned closer. "You're handling this with incredible grace." Grace. There was that word again. Bentley's favorite weapon. Grace meant silence. Grace meant swallowing humiliation until it tasted normal. Grace meant protecting a man while he destroyed you privately. A server passed carrying champagne. Blanche grabbed a fresh glass and drank this one too quickly. The burn steadied her. For a moment, her eyes drifted toward the giant portrait above the fireplace. Bentley stood there in the navy suit, smiling confidently at the camera like a man who believed the world belonged to him. Maybe it always had. Until now. Blanche. Savannah's voice slid through the room smoothly. Several conversations quieted instantly. Of course they did. People loved tragedy when it wore designer clothes. Savannah approached slowly, heels clicking softly against marble. Up close, she smelled like jasmine and expensive hair products. Younger than Blanche by nearly 10 years. Softer, glossier, curated. "I just wanted to say," Savannah's voice trembled delicately, "I know this must be unbearable for you." Blanche looked at her hand, at Bentley's watch, at the diamond bracelet Bentley once claimed had belonged to a client's wife, then back into Savannah's carefully sympathetic eyes. "You're wearing his watch." Savannah hesitated only briefly. "Oh!" She touched it instinctively. "He gave it to me last year." Last year, while Blanche was planning Bentley's birthday dinner. While Blanche was sitting beside him at charity galas. While Blanche was defending him to friends who quietly hinted he seemed distant lately. Savannah lowered her voice. "He loved you in his own way." The sentence landed like a slap. Blanche stared at her for several seconds. Then she smiled. Not politely this time. Dangerously. "You should leave before people start confusing grief with entitlement." Savannah's expression flickered. Only for a moment. But Blanche saw it. The insecurity beneath the confidence. Interesting. Savannah leaned closer. "Bentley said you preferred pretending over facing reality." Blanche's pulse slowed. That happened sometimes when she got truly angry. Everything inside her became cold and precise. What reality was that, she asked softly. Savannah swallowed. "That he stayed with you out of obligation." The room suddenly felt very quiet. Somewhere nearby, someone stopped talking mid-sentence. Savannah realized too late that several people had heard her. Good. Blanche tilted her head slightly. "And yet he still died, married to me." Savannah's face hardened. For the first time all evening, the mask slipped. There it was. Not grief, competition, possession, humiliation. Savannah stepped back first. Blanche watched her disappear into the crowd before finally allowing herself to breathe. "Mrs. Duncan." The voice came from behind her. Graham Ellis. Bentley's accountant stood near the hallway entrance holding a leather folder against his chest. He looked uncomfortable in the way honest men often looked around wealth. Gray suit, tired eyes, nervous posture. Blanche had known Graham for 15 years, yet Bentley rarely allowed them to speak privately. Now she wondered why. "Can we talk somewhere quieter?" Graham asked carefully. Margaret noticed immediately from across the room. Of course she did. That family noticed everything except betrayal. Blanche nodded once and followed Graham down the hallway toward Bentley's office. The noise of the reception faded behind them. Inside the office, the air smelled like cedarwood and Bentley's cologne. Her chest tightened instantly. Graham closed the door. For several seconds he said nothing, then he exhaled heavily. "I should have spoken sooner." Blanche folded her arms. "About the affair?" His face tightened. "The affair is the least dangerous thing Bentley left behind." A chill moved slowly down her spine. Graham placed the folder carefully on the desk. "There are financial transfers you need to see," he said quietly. "Large ones, hidden ones." Blanche stared at him. How large Graham met her eyes. Large enough to destroy reputations. Blanche barely slept after the funeral reception. The mansion felt haunted now, not by Bentley's death, by his presence. Every room carried traces of him, the whiskey glasses he left beside the fireplace, the expensive coats hanging in the mud room, the scent of his cologne trapped in the fabric of their bedroom curtains. Even dead Bentley Duncan still occupied space like he owned it. At 3 a.m, Blanche sat alone in the kitchen wearing one of his cashmere sweaters she hadn't realized she still reached for automatically. The financial documents Graham emailed her glowed from her laptop screen. Columns of numbers, transfers, accounts, shell companies. At first they looked meaningless. Then patterns started emerging. Payments routed through consulting firms that didn't exist, property investments under hidden LLCs, large sums transferred overseas. Blanche rubbed her temples. Bentley always handled the money personally, not because she wasn't capable, because he insisted it reduced stress for her. Now she understood what that really meant. Control. A memory surfaced suddenly. 5 years earlier. They had been standing in their Manhattan penthouse kitchen after Blanche received an offer to return to corporate consulting. She remembered the excitement she felt opening the email. A 6-figure position. Creative director role. Travel opportunities. Her own identity again. Bentley barely looked up from his phone when she told him. "That seems unnecessary." She laughed nervously. "Unnecessary. You don't need to work. I know I don't need to. I want to." That annoyed him immediately. Bentley set his phone down slowly. "And what happens to everything here while you're off rediscovering yourself? Everything here. Meaning him. Meaning his life. Meaning his schedule. Meaning the carefully constructed image she maintained for 20 years while he climbed higher and higher through New York's financial elite." At the time, Blanche convinced herself his reaction came from love. Now she realized it came from fear. Because financially independent women were harder to control. Her chest tightened. She looked back at the spreadsheet Graham sent. One transfer line caught her attention. Pierce Strategic Holdings, LLC. The name hit her instantly. Pierce. Savannah Pierce? Blanche clicked the file open. Her heartbeat slowed. Over $3 million had been transferred into accounts connected to Savannah over the last 4 years. $3 million, not gifts, not an affair, an operation. "Oh my God," Blanche whispered. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller. She pushed the laptop away and stood too quickly, dizziness washing over her. 20 years. 20 years of loyalty. She remembered defending Bentley constantly, to friends, to herself. To the lonely woman staring back at her in bathroom mirrors after midnight dinners alone, Bentley had always been emotionally unavailable in ways that were difficult to explain to outsiders. He never screamed, never hit her, never openly humiliated her in public. Men like Bentley didn't destroy women loudly. They did it carefully, elegantly. One disappointment at a time, one withheld affection at a time, one manipulation disguised as reason at a time, until the woman questioning him started questioning herself instead. Blanche walked slowly into the dark living room. Moonlight spilled across the marble floors while silence wrapped around the mansion like fog. Her eyes landed on a framed magazine cover near the fireplace. The Duncans' Wall Street's golden couple. She stared at the photograph. Bentley looked powerful, Blanche looked beautiful. Neither looked real. Her phone buzzed suddenly. Graham Ellis. Blanche answered immediately. I saw the transfers. A pause. Then Graham spoke quietly. There's more. Of course there was. There's always more with men like Bentley, Blanche said bitterly. Graham exhaled slowly. Mrs. Duncan. Blanche. I need you to understand something before we continue. She closed her eyes briefly. What your husband didn't just hide money from you. He built an entire financial structure around keeping you uninformed. The words settled heavily in her chest. She sank onto the sofa. Why? Because if you ever left him, you would have been entitled to half. Blanche laughed softly, not because anything was funny, because the cruelty was almost impressive. So he prepared for divorce while convincing me our marriage was stable. Yes. Her throat tightened. A memory surfaced again. 2 years earlier, Blanche had asked Bentley if he was happy. He looked irritated by the question. Why do you keep looking for problems? I'm trying to connect with my husband. You overthink emotions. Overthink emotions. The phrase made her physically ill now, because she hadn't been overthinking. She had been slowly dying inside a marriage that rewarded her silence. Blanche Graham's voice pulled her back. There's another thing you should know. Her stomach sank instantly. What the shell companies tied to Savannah weren't just used for transfers. She waited. They were used to secure debt. Blanche frowned. What kind of debt? Graham hesitated too long, then quietly said debt connected to your name. Everything inside her went still. What I found? Signatures authorizing liability coverage under marital protections. I never signed anything. I know. The room tilted slightly. Blanche gripped the edge of the sofa. Forgery. Bentley forged documents using her identity. A sharp wave of nausea hit her. Not because she couldn't believe it, because part of her could. That was the worst part. When betrayal stopped shocking you and started making sense, I need copies of everything, she whispered. You'll have them. And Graham? Yes. Why are you helping me? Silence lingered. When he finally answered, his voice sounded older somehow. Because I spent 15 years watching a very intelligent woman slowly disappear. Blanche looked toward the dark staircase. Disappear. Yes, that was exactly what happened. Not overnight, not dramatically, piece by piece. Bentley convinced her to step back from her career because the marriage needed balance. Bentley convinced her to stop traveling because home should matter more. Bentley convinced her certain friends were negative influences. Bentley convinced her emotional loneliness was sophistication. By the end, Blanche barely recognized herself, and somehow she still loved him. That was the humiliating truth clawing through her chest. Even after the affair, even after the letter, even after discovering he financially trapped her, part of her still mourned him. Not the real Bentley, the version she spent years trying to earn love from. Her eyes filled suddenly, but she forced the tears back down. No, she was done crying for men who weaponized her devotion. I want every file, Blanche repeated calmly, every transfer, every account, every lie. You'll get them. She ended the call and sat motionless for several minutes. Then slowly Blanche stood. For the first time in years, she walked toward Bentley's private office without hesitation. The door creaked softly as she entered. Mahogany shelves, leather chairs, perfectly organized. Bentley loved rooms that made him feel important. Her gaze moved across the desk until it landed on the bottom drawer. Locked. Of course. Bentley locked everything eventually. His phone, his emotions, his truth. Blanche crouched slowly in front of the drawer. Then she remembered something. Bentley always hid backup keys inside ridiculous places because he believed no one was observant enough to find them. A game he found amusing. She opened the bookshelf cabinet beside the desk, reached behind a crystal decanter, and found the small silver key instantly. A strange sadness hit her. After 20 years, she still knew exactly how his mind worked. Blanche slid the key into the lock. Her hand trembled slightly, then she opened the drawer. Inside sat several burner phones, stacks of hotel receipts, jewelry invoices, financial folders, and one photograph. Savannah laughing on a yacht while Bentley kissed her shoulder. The date stamped in the corner was the same weekend Blanche buried her father alone because Bentley claimed he had an international investor emergency. Blanche stared at the photograph silently. Then something inside her finally hardened. Not heartbreak, not grief, something colder, something stronger, because for the first time since Bentley died, Blanche stopped feeling abandoned and started feeling angry. Rain covered Manhattan in silver streaks the morning Blanche Duncan walked into Bentley's corporate headquarters. Duncan Capital occupied the top 12 floors of a glass tower overlooking Midtown. The building had always reminded Blanche of Bentley himself, expensive, admired, cold. Employees lowered their voices when she entered the lobby. Some stared openly. Others avoided eye contact altogether. Everyone already knew about Savannah Pierce. In wealthy circles, scandals traveled faster than ambulances. Mrs. Duncan, the receptionist, said nervously. "Mr. Ellis is waiting upstairs." Blanche nodded once. She wore black tailored trousers and a cream silk blouse beneath a camel coat. Simple, sharp, controlled, not grieving widow. Not anymore. The elevator doors closed softly around her reflection. For a moment she barely recognized the woman staring back. Her face looked thinner after only a week. Harder, too. Good. By the time the elevator opened onto the executive floor, the storm outside had intensified. Thunder rolled across the skyline while assistants hurried through hallways, pretending not to watch her. Bentley's office sat at the far end of this corridor like a throne room. The door was already open. Graham Ellis stood beside the windows holding a thick stack of folders. His expression darkened when he saw her. "You came alone?" "Yes, that's probably safer." Blanche frowned slightly as she stepped inside. Safer from who Graham closed the office door carefully before answering. People protecting Bentley's legacy. The words hung heavily between them. Blanche looked around slowly. Nothing in the office had moved since Bentley's death. His suit still hung beside the private lounge. His coffee mug remained on the desk. Even his favorite Mont Blanc pen sat exactly where he left it. The room felt preserved, like a shrine built for a man who didn't deserve one. Graham placed the folders down. "I spent all night pulling records," he said quietly. "There's no easy way to explain this, so I'm just going to show you." Blanche sat across from him at the conference table. Graham opened the first folder. Bank statements, transfer records, corporate filings. At first the pages blurred together. Then Graham pointed to several highlighted sections. "These shell companies were established 4 years ago." Blanche read the names silently. Holloway Consulting, Pierce Strategic Holdings, Vanguard Equity Solutions. "All fake?" she asked. "Legally registered," Graham replied. "Operationally meaningless." Her eyes narrowed. How much money moved through them? Graham hesitated. Approximately $11 million. Blanche's breath caught. 11 million. She stared at him, waiting for him to say he made a mistake. He didn't. "That's impossible. It's hidden across layered transactions, offshore routing, and deferred assets." Graham explained carefully. Bentley was very good at financial concealment. Very good. Of course he was. Bentley loved control more than honesty. Blanche flipped through another set of documents. Her chest tightened when she saw Savannah's name repeatedly connected to luxury purchases, private accounts, and property investments. He funded her entire life. Yes, Blanche swallowed hard. While telling me we needed to reduce spending, the humiliation burned hotter than grief now. She remembered every conversation, every guilt trip, every time Bentley sighed dramatically when she bought something unnecessary. You already have enough handbags. We should be more disciplined this quarter. Appearances matter. Meanwhile, he was secretly financing another woman's penthouse. Blanche laughed once under her breath. Not because it was funny, because rage sometimes sounded like disbelief. Graham slid another file toward her slowly. This is the part that concerns me most. Blanche opened it. Loan agreements, debt structures, insurance-backed liabilities. Then she saw it. Her signature. Except it wasn't hers. Her stomach dropped instantly. No. Graham's expression remained grim. We had handwriting analysis done internally last year after an auditor raised concerns. Blanche looked up sharply. You knew. We suspected. Suspected! Her voice cracked suddenly. My husband forged my name, and no one told me. Graham looked genuinely ashamed. Bentley shut it down before it escalated. Of course he did. Thunder shook the windows behind them. Blanche stared at the forged signatures again. There were dozens. Bentley had tied her name to debt protections connected to failing investments. If those accounts collapsed, she could have been financially ruined without even understanding why. A memory surfaced violently. 3 years ago, Blanche standing in their kitchen after receiving a fraud alert call from the bank. She remembered confronting Bentley nervously. There are charges connected to accounts I don't recognize. Bentley barely looked annoyed. You're overreacting again. But they're under I handled it. Then he kissed her forehead dismissively and left for work. She remembered apologizing afterward. Apologizing for questioning fraud committed against her. Blanche suddenly felt sick. She stood too quickly and walked toward the windows, pressing trembling fingers against the cold glass. Below her, Manhattan moved normally. Taxis, pedestrians, businessmen carrying coffee. The world continued spinning while hers quietly collapsed. How long, she asked softly. Graham knew what she meant. How long was he preparing? Years? Years. Bentley had been building an exit strategy while sleeping beside her every night. Preparing for divorce, protecting assets, manipulating liabilities. And all the while he kept telling her marriage required trust. Blanche closed her eyes. He made me feel crazy. Graham said nothing, because there was nothing to argue with. Bentley didn't scream at Blanche. He rewrote reality around her until she doubted her own instincts. That was his talent. A soft knock interrupted the silence. Graham immediately stiffened. Then the office door opened. The woman entering wore a charcoal pantsuit so perfectly tailored it looked expensive enough to intimidate people intentionally. Sharp cheekbones, dark hair pulled back cleanly, calm eyes that missed nothing. Naomi Reyes. Blanche recognized the name instantly. Corporate litigation attorney, Manhattan elite, ruthless in court. Naomi placed a leather briefcase onto the table. Mrs. Duncan. Her voice was smooth and direct. I'm sorry for your loss. Blanche almost laughed at how meaningless the phrase sounded now. You've reviewed the files, Blanche asked. Yes. And Naomi sat across from her. And your late husband spent years constructing financial barriers designed to leave you powerless. Straight to the point. Blanche appreciated that. Naomi opened her briefcase and removed several documents. The affair is emotionally devastating, she said calmly. But legally, the affair isn't your strongest leverage. Blanche frowned slightly. The fraud is. A dangerous silence settled over the room. Naomi slid Bentley's handwritten letter across the table. The same letter Blanche had memorized already. Please don't make a spectacle of yourself after I'm gone. Grace was always your role. Naomi tapped the page lightly. This, she said, is fascinating. Blanche looked confused. It's cruel? Yes, but it's also revealing. Naomi's eyes sharpened. This letter establishes a pattern of coercive psychological control, combined with forged signatures, concealed assets, and financial manipulation. She leaned back slightly. Your husband accidentally created evidence against himself. For the first time since Bentley died, Blanche felt something unfamiliar move through her chest. Power. Small. Fragile. But real. Naomi continued flipping through documents. There's another issue. Of course there was. Blanche almost smiled bitterly. What now? Naomi pulled out a trust amendment. This clause was altered 6 months ago. Blanche leaned closer. The language was complicated, but one sentence stood out immediately. Beneficiary restructuring tied to discretionary partner allocation. Savannah. Bentley had quietly modified trust structures before his death. Naomi's expression darkened. This amendment shouldn't exist. Why? Because the timing violates fiduciary disclosure obligations tied to marital protections. Blanche stared at her. English. Naomi's lips twitched faintly. It may be illegal. Lightning flashed outside the windows. For a moment, the entire office glowed white. Then Naomi said the words that changed everything. We may be able to freeze the mistress's payout entirely. Blanche's pulse slowed. Not from fear, from clarity. Bentley spent years believing she would remain graceful, quiet, forgiving, manageable. He built his entire betrayal around that assumption. And for the first time, Blanche wondered what would happen when everyone realized he was wrong. Savannah Pierce lived 30 floors above Manhattan like a woman waiting to be admired. The building overlooked Central Park from the west side, all steel and tinted glass and silent wealth. The lobby smelled faintly of orchids and expensive cleaning products, while soft piano music floated through hidden speakers. Blanche stepped out of the elevator wearing a long ivory coat and dark sunglasses despite the rain outside. The concierge recognized her immediately. That was the problem with public humiliation in wealthy circles. Everyone knew your business before you finished processing it yourself. Ms. Pierce is expecting you, he said carefully. Of course she was. Savannah probably spent the entire morning rehearsing this moment. The penthouse doors opened directly into a living room bigger than most apartments in Manhattan. Cream furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows, fresh lilies arranged on marble counters. Everything looked curated for social media perfection. Bentley paid for all of it. Blanche could see him everywhere in the design choices. Minimalist luxury, cold elegance, no warmth. Savannah stood beside the windows holding a glass of white wine. She wore silk lounge pants and a cashmere sweater soft enough to suggest vulnerability while still looking impossibly expensive. Bentley loved women who looked delicate. It made him feel powerful. You came alone, Savannah said. Blanche removed her sunglasses slowly. Should I have brought an audience? Savannah gave a small laugh. You always were more composed than I expected. Expected? Interesting word. Like Bentley and Savannah discussed Blanche privately often enough to build theories about her personality, the thought should have broken her heart. Instead, it made her angry. Savannah gestured toward the seating area. Would you like coffee? Number wine, no guillo. Savannah smiled faintly. Straight to war, then. Blanche walked deeper into the apartment, slowly taking everything in. A framed photograph near the piano caught her attention immediately. Bentley and Savannah in Saint-Tropez. Bentley wearing the same linen shirt he told Blanche he packed for a leadership retreat in Boston. Her stomach twisted briefly. Not from jealousy anymore, from humiliation. How many lies had she swallowed simply because she loved him? Savannah watched her carefully. He said you hated conflict. Blanche turned toward her. He talked about me often. Savannah hesitated only slightly before answering. When it suited him, there it was again. The subtle competition, the need to establish intimacy. Mistresses always wanted the wife to know they mattered more emotionally. Blanche almost pitied her for needing that victory so badly. Almost. Savannah crossed one leg elegantly. Bentley wasn't happy for a long time. Then he should have left. The answer came instantly. Savannah blinked. Blanche continued calmly. Men always want credit for suffering inside marriages they refuse to walk away from. Savannah's jaw tightened slightly. You think this is simple because you were the wife? No, Blanche replied softly. I think it's simple because adults make choices. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Rain slid down the windows behind Savannah, while traffic hummed faintly below the building. Finally, Savannah sighed. You really don't know, do you? Blanche felt her pulse slow instinctively. Know what? Savannah stood and walked toward the kitchen island. He was going to divorce you. The sentence landed carefully, measured for maximum damage. Blanche said nothing. Savannah opened a drawer and removed a stack of documents casually. Property brochures, architectural renderings, a beachfront house in Malibu. He was planning our future. Our future. Blanche looked at the papers without touching them. Bentley once told Blanche he hated California because Los Angeles rewards shallow people, apparently not shallow enough to stop buying houses there for his mistress. Savannah studied her expression closely. You don't seem surprised. That's because betrayal stopped surprising me several years ago. That answer unsettled Savannah slightly. Blanche noticed immediately. Interesting. Savannah expected tears, anger, desperation, not calm. Bentley probably described Blanche as emotionally dependent. Weak women were easier to compete against. You know what your problem was? Savannah asked suddenly. Blanche almost smiled. No, but I'm sure you rehearsed this speech. Savannah ignored the comment. You made him feel trapped. There it was. The mistress fantasy. The wife was cold. The marriage was dead. The affair was destiny. Blanche had heard versions of this story before from other women at charity lunches, pretending not to discuss scandals. Savannah stepped closer. He said you stopped seeing him. Blanche's expression finally changed. Not pain, disbelief. Because the cruelty of that statement was almost artistic. Blanche spent years seeing Bentley too much. Every mood, every silence, every insecurity hidden beneath expensive suits and arrogant smiles. She saw him so clearly she disappeared trying to accommodate him. He said, Savannah continued carefully, that you became more like an obligation than a partner. Obligation. The word sliced cleanly through Blanche's chest. Not because she believed it, because part of her remembered trying desperately not to become exactly that. Flashback hit her hard. 3 winters earlier. Blanche standing alone at a charity gala while Bentley spent 40 minutes outside taking a business call. She remembered finally asking quietly in the car ride home, Do you even want to be here with me anymore? Bentley stared out the window. You make everything emotionally exhausting. That sentence haunted her for months afterward. She spent almost a year trying to become easier to love. Smaller needs, less emotion, less questioning. God. The realization made her feel physically ill now. Savannah moved closer still. He chose me because I made him happy. Blanche looked directly into her eyes. No, she said softly. He chose you because you required less accountability. Savannah's face hardened instantly. There it is. What the bitterness? Blanche nearly laughed. Bitterness, such a convenient word men use to describe women reacting appropriately to betrayal. Savannah crossed her arms. Bentley said you lived in denial, and Bentley lied professionally. The room went quiet. Savannah's expression flickered with irritation. Good. Blanche wanted her irritated. People revealed themselves faster when emotionally cornered. Savannah poured herself more wine with unsteady hands. He loved me. Blanche watched her carefully, noticed the tension beneath the confidence, the desperation. Interesting again. You keep saying that, Blanche replied quietly, almost like you're trying to convince yourself. Savannah slammed the wine bottle down harder than intended. He promised me shares in Duncan Capital. Blanche stayed perfectly still. There it was, the first real mistake. Savannah continued before realizing what she admitted. He said once the restructuring finalized, you have paperwork. Savannah froze. Too late. Blanche's mind sharpened instantly. Bentley promised her equity, corporate promises, financial promises, not emotional fantasy, legal exposure. Savannah recovered quickly, narrowing her eyes. You're recording this conversation, aren't you? Blanche tilted her head slightly. Would that make you nervous? Savannah stared at her. For the first time since Blanche arrived, genuine uncertainty entered the younger woman's face. Because suddenly Blanche no longer looked like the grieving wife. She looked dangerous. Savannah stepped forward angrily. You think you can scare me because you signed some papers with lawyers? No, Blanche said calmly. I think Bentley already scared you enough for both of us. That hit. Blanche saw it instantly. The tiny crack. Savannah looked away first. Exactly like women did when they accidentally recognized truth. Then Savannah whispered bitterly, At least he desired me. The cruelty of it echoed softly through this apartment. Blanche stood there quietly for several seconds, then finally answered. Desire is easy. Savannah frowned. Blanche's voice stayed calm, controlled, devastating. Men desire women every day, but building a life with someone, trusting them with your reputation, your career, your family, her eyes sharpened. That's the part Bentley was incapable of. Savannah looked shaken now, not victorious, not glamorous, just insecure. And suddenly Blanche understood something terrifying. Bentley hadn't loved either of them properly. He simply used women differently. Her phone buzzed suddenly. Naomi Reyes. Blanche answered immediately. Tell me you have good news. Naomi's voice came crisp through the speaker. I found another liability account. Blanche's stomach tightened. What kind? A pause. Then Naomi said carefully, A very large loan was secured under your name 3 months before Bentley died. Blanche's blood ran cold. How large enough to bankrupt you? The rain hadn't stopped by the time Blanche returned to Greenwich. Water streaked across the windshield while the city lights behind her dissolved into blurred gold and white. Her driver asked twice if she wanted him to wait. She told him no. For the first time in years, Blanche wanted silence more than comfort. The mansion stood dark when she entered, except for the soft glow of kitchen lights left on by staff, who no longer knew how to speak to her normally. Everyone walked around her carefully now, like betrayal might be contagious. Blanche removed her coat slowly and climbed the staircase toward Bentley's office again. The house creaked softly beneath her heels. 20 years of marriage lived inside these walls. Dinner parties, Christmases, arguments whispered behind closed doors. Nights she waited awake while Bentley claimed meetings ran late. She used to think loneliness inside marriage was temporary, Now she understood some women spent entire lifetimes abandoned beside someone. The office door remained slightly open from earlier. Bentley's kingdom, his sanctuary, his hiding place. Blanche stepped inside, carrying the new loan documents Naomi sent to her phone, $7.4 million, secured partially under forged marital authorization. If those investments collapsed, the liability could destroy her financially. Even dead Bentley had positioned her to absorb damage while protecting himself. Her hands trembled once before stilling again. No more shaking, no more panic. Blanche walked directly toward the open drawer she discovered earlier. Burner phones, receipts, photographs, evidence of another life. She sat behind Bentley's desk for the first time in years. He hated when people touched his office. "This is where I think he used to say." No, this was where he hid. Blanche picked up the first burner phone carefully. Locked. The second one, too. The third opened immediately. A flood of messages appeared. Savannah. Unknown numbers. Travel confirmations. Luxury purchases. Then Blanche saw her own name. Her chest tightened instantly. Bentley. She suspects nothing. Unknown number. "Are you sure Bentley Blanche trusts me completely?" The words hollowed something inside her. Not because she trusted him, because she did. Completely. She remembered defending Bentley when friends hinted his behavior seemed suspicious. "Bentley's just stressed. Bentley works constantly. Bentley isn't expressive emotionally." Every excuse sounded pathetic now. Blanche kept scrolling, then stopped suddenly. A message from Savannah. "Did you tell her about Malibu?" Bentley's response came minutes later. "Why would I complicate things before the restructuring finishes?" Blanche stared at the screen. Restructuring. Not divorce, not separation. Financial restructuring. She realized something horrifying then. Bentley never planned emotional freedom. He planned asset protection. Her marriage had become a business liability calculation. A wave of nausea rolled through her. Blanche stood abruptly and crossed toward the private bar in the corner. She poured bourbon with shaking hands despite barely drinking normally. The burn steadied her. Barely. Her eyes drifted toward a photograph on Bentley's bookshelf, the two of them in Aspen 10 years earlier. Blanche remembered that trip vividly. She had just lost a major client opportunity after Bentley convinced her not to accept a partnership offer in Chicago. You traveling constantly would destroy the marriage, he told her. So she stayed. And Bentley spent most of the vacation taking calls outside while she drank coffee alone near hotel fireplaces, pretending not to feel abandoned. God. How had she normalized this for so long? Because emotional neglect didn't happen dramatically. It happened gradually. One disappointment at a time until your standards became survival instead of happiness. Blanche returned to the desk and opened another folder. Jewelry invoices, private jet manifests, hotel reservations. One receipt made her freeze. The date matched the weekend of her father's funeral. Bentley told her he couldn't attend because investors from London arrived unexpectedly. But according to the invoice, he spent that weekend at a resort in Turks and Caicos with Savannah. Blanche sank slowly into the chair. The grief hit differently this time. Not loud, not explosive, just crushing. She remembered standing beside her father's grave alone while rain soaked through her coat. Bentley called halfway through the burial service. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'm trying to get back tonight." She believed him. Even then she believed him. Blanche covered her mouth suddenly as tears finally escaped. Not because Bentley cheated, not even because he lied. Because she realized how little care he felt while she loved him wholeheartedly. That was the unbearable part. She cried silently for several minutes before forcing herself upright again. Enough! Bentley already stole enough years from her. He didn't get her dignity, too. Blanche wiped her face carefully and reached deeper into the drawer. Her fingers brushed against something small hidden beneath paperwork. A voice recorder. Old-fashioned. Digital. Black. Her pulse slowed immediately. She pressed play. Static crackled softly. Then Bentley's voice filled the office. Smooth. Confident. Familiar enough to hurt. If anything happens to me before the transfers finalize, Graham will panic first. Blanche went completely still. Bentley continued calmly, almost amused. But he's too cautious to act quickly. Naomi Reyes might become a problem if Blanche ever grows suspicious. Blanche's stomach dropped. He knew about Naomi. How far ahead had he planned everything? The recording crackled again. Then Bentley laughed quietly. Not that Blanche notices much anymore. The sentence sliced straight through her chest. He sounded bored, dismissive, like discussing furniture instead of his wife. Savannah's voice appeared faintly in the background. You underestimate her. Bentley laughed again. No, Blanche's greatest strength is loyalty. A pause, which also happens to be her greatest weakness. Silence swallowed the room. Blanche stared at the recorder in disbelief. Weakness. That was what her love became to him, a weakness to exploit. Her breathing turned shallow. Another memory surfaced suddenly. 2 years earlier, Bentley standing behind her at a charity event while adjusting the necklace around her throat. You know why our marriage works, he whispered. Why? Because you know how to stand beside me without competing. At the time, the sentence sounded romantic. Now she heard the truth underneath it. Stay smaller, stay useful, stay quiet. Blanche shut the recorder off abruptly. The silence afterward felt violent. Outside, thunder shook the windows again. She stared around Bentley's office slowly. Every award, every framed article, every expensive object, all built on manipulation, not just financial manipulation, emotional manipulation. Bentley didn't love admiration, he loved control, and suddenly Blanche understood something terrifying. Men like Bentley never expected consequences because they carefully chose women trained to absorb pain gracefully. That was why the letter enraged her now. Grace was always your role. No, Grace had been a cage. Blanche stood slowly and walked toward the office mirror near the bookshelf. For several seconds, she simply stared at herself, her makeup slightly smudged, eyes tired. But something else too, something sharper, harder, alive. For the first time since Bentley died, Blanche no longer felt like a widow. She felt like a witness, and witnesses could destroy empires. Her phone buzzed. Naomi Reyes. Blanche answered immediately. I found something, she said. Naomi's voice sharpened. What kind of something? Blanche looked down at the voice recorder in her hand, the kind that turns betrayal into evidence. Margaret Duncan's dinner parties always felt like performances disguised as family. Even now. Especially now. 3 nights later, Blanche stood outside Margaret's estate in Rye, New York, staring at the glowing windows while rainwater shimmered across the stone driveway. The invitation hadn't sounded optional. Family should handle difficult moments privately, Margaret said over the phone earlier that morning. Translation, stop embarrassing the Duncan name. Blanche almost didn't come, but Naomi encouraged it immediately. Women like Margaret always reveal themselves eventually, she said. You just need to stay calm long enough to let them. So Blanche came calm. Cold calm. The butler opened the door before she knocked. Inside the dining room glowed beneath candlelight and crystal chandeliers. Silverware gleamed against white linen, while soft classical music drifted through hidden speakers. Everything looked immaculate. Margaret believed beautiful environments could disguise ugly people. At the far end of the table sat Ethan Cole, Bentley's longtime board member, mid-50s, sharp suits, intelligent eyes. Unlike most men in Bentley's circle, Ethan always spoke to Blanche like she existed beyond decorative value. He stood immediately when she entered. Blanche. His voice carried genuine warmth. Margaret noticed. Of course she did. Sit down, she said coolly. We're waiting on no one else. The dinner began quietly enough. Wine poured. Courses served. Conversations carefully superficial. Margaret discussed charity committees while pretending the family empire wasn't bleeding internally. Ethan asked Blanche how she was sleeping. Margaret visibly disliked the question. Blanche almost smiled. Not particularly well, Blanche answered honestly. Margaret set down her wine glass delicately. Well, public scandal rarely improves rest. There it was. Straight to business. Blanche folded her napkin carefully onto her lap. You invited me here to discuss scandal. I invited you because grief is making you irrational. Ethan shifted slightly in his chair. Margaret ignored him. You're meeting with attorneys, accountants, investigators. Her tone sharpened. Bentley has barely been buried. Blanche looked at her steadily. He forged my signature. Margaret's face remained perfectly composed. Men under pressure make mistakes. Blanche actually stared at her. Not because she was shocked anymore, because hearing cruelty spoken so casually still felt surreal. A mistress is a mistake, Blanche said quietly. Fraud is a crime. Margaret sighed softly like a disappointed teacher. You're emotional. No, Blanche replied. I'm finally paying attention. Silence settled across the table. Ethan took a slow sip of wine, watching both women carefully. Margaret leaned back in her chair. Do you know why powerful marriages survive? She asked. Blanche already knew this wouldn't be about love. They survive because intelligent women understand endurance. There it was. The religion of women like Margaret Duncan. Suffer quietly. Protect appearances. Preserve the man at all costs. Blanche suddenly saw the entire generational sickness clearly. Margaret didn't defend Bentley because he deserved it. She defended him because admitting his behavior was monstrous meant admitting what she tolerated in her own life too. Did your husband cheat on you? Blanche asked calmly. The question sliced through the room. Margaret's expression froze for half a second. Only half. Yes, she answered finally. Ethan looked down immediately. Interesting. He already knew. And you stayed? Blanche said softly. Of course I stayed. Why, Margaret's eyes hardened. Because marriage is bigger than feelings. No, marriage was apparently bigger than self-respect. Blanche looked around the luxurious dining room slowly. The antique silverware, the imported flowers, the million-dollar art, all purchased with decades of emotional silence. What a tragic thing to teach women, Blanche murmured. Margaret's jaw tightened. You think you're morally superior because Bentley embarrassed you? Blanche laughed quietly. No, I think Bentley embarrassed himself. The room went still. Even the servers suddenly seemed nervous. Margaret lowered her voice. You will stop this legal circus immediately. There's no circus, Blanche replied evenly. There's evidence. There's grief. There's fraud. Margaret's eyes flashed. Do not destroy this family over wounded pride. That sentence did it. Something inside Blanche snapped cleanly into place. Not emotionally, structurally, like finally understanding the shape of her own anger. She leaned forward slowly. For 20 years, she said softly, I protected Bentley's reputation while he slowly dismantled my life behind closed doors. Margaret opened her mouth, but Blanche continued. I defended him when he disappeared emotionally. I defended him when he humiliated me. I defended him while he stole from me. Ethan watched silently now, carefully. Blanche's voice sharpened. And somehow all of you still expect me to protect him. Margaret's composure finally cracked slightly. You're acting hysterical. Blanche smiled faintly. No, hysterical would have been setting his office on fire. Ethan almost choked on his wine. Margaret stared at Blanche like she no longer recognized her. Good. Blanche barely recognized herself either, and maybe that was the point. Margaret leaned back coldly. You know what Bentley said about you near the end? Ethan immediately spoke. Margaret. No, Blanche interrupted calmly. Let her. Margaret studied her for a moment, then smiled cruelly. He said you stopped inspiring him. The words landed heavily, not because they hurt, because once upon a time they would have destroyed her. Blanche remembered spending years trying to remain interesting enough for Bentley. Prettier, softer, less demanding, more elegant. Women married to emotionally selfish men often became unpaid actresses performing worthiness daily. But now the sentence just sounded pathetic. Blanche tilted her head slightly. You know what's fascinating? Margaret frowned. Bentley surrounded himself with women shrinking for him. Blanche's eyes sharpened, and somehow he still felt inadequate. Ethan looked at her differently after that, not sympathetically, respectfully. Margaret's voice turned icy. Careful. No, Blanche replied softly. I spent 2 decades being careful. Thunder echoed outside. Blanche stood slowly from the table. The room seemed smaller now, or maybe she finally stopped folding herself to fit inside it. Margaret rose too. If you continue this investigation, Duncan Capital could collapse. There are consequences for fraud. There are consequences for revenge too. Blanche stepped closer. This isn't revenge. Then what is it? Blanche held Margaret's gaze steadily. Accountability. Margaret looked away first. Small victory, but meaningful. Ethan stood as Blanche reached for her coat. Can I walk you out? Margaret visibly disliked that. Unnecessary, she snapped. Ethan ignored her completely. Outside rain hammered against the stone steps while cold winds swept across the property. For several seconds neither spoke. Then Ethan exhaled heavily. I knew Bentley was hiding financial issues, he admitted quietly. I didn't know it was this bad. Blanche looked at him carefully. How bad is it? Ethan hesitated. The board's getting nervous. That caught her attention immediately. Nervous about what? Missing funds, internal inconsistencies, offshore exposure. So it was spreading already. Good. Ethan shoved his hands into his coat pockets. For what it's worth? He paused. Bentley underestimated you. Blanche almost laughed. No, she said quietly. Bentley spent years making sure I underestimated myself. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly like he finally understood something important. As Blanche stepped toward her car, Ethan spoke again. There's an emergency board meeting next week. She stopped. Why are you telling me this? Because if things continue unraveling... His eyes sharpened slightly. Someone's going to need to explain the truth before the vultures do. Blanche's pulse slowed. Corporate panic, board instability, financial exposure. Bentley's empire was cracking, and for the first time since his death, Blanche no longer wanted to survive the collapse. She wanted to witness it. Then Ethan delivered the sentence that stayed with her the entire drive home. The board is starting to realize the wrong Duncan died. Naomi Reyes operated like a woman who had stopped being intimidated a very long time ago. Her office sat 38 floors above Manhattan inside a law firm built from glass steel and expensive confidence. The reception area overlooked the Hudson while junior associates moved quickly through hallways, carrying files thick enough to ruin lives. Blanche arrived 10 minutes early. Naomi appreciated punctuality. Coffee, Naomi asked as Blanche entered the conference room. No, Naomi nodded once. Good. You'll think clearer angry. Blanche almost smiled. Over the past week, Naomi had become something unfamiliar in Blanche's life. Not comfort, not sympathy, strategy. The conference table was covered in documents already. Trust amendments, forensic accounting reports, corporate filings. Savannah's shell companies connected by highlighted lines like veins feeding something diseased. Naomi stood beside the windows in a charcoal suit with her dark hair pinned back sharply. There are 3 priorities now, she said calmly. Protect your assets. Expose the fraud. Freeze Savannah Pierce before she moves money. Blanche sat slowly. You make it sound simple. It isn't simple. Naomi met her eyes directly. It's just necessary. Necessary. Blanche liked that word better than grace. Naomi slid several folders toward her. I reviewed the recordings you found. Blanche's stomach tightened slightly. Hearing Bentley's voice again had affected her more than she admitted. Not because she missed him, because emotional manipulation sounded terrifyingly normal once you replayed it enough. Naomi tapped Bentley's handwritten letter again. Combined with the recordings, this helps establish coercive control. Blanche frowned. You keep using that phrase. Because that's what this was. Naomi sat across from her. Bentley isolated you financially, controlled information access, manipulated emotional responses, redirected liabilities into your name while maintaining dependence. Her voice sharpened slightly. Powerful men rarely destroy women dramatically anymore. They do it administratively. The sentence settled heavily into Blanche's chest. Administratively, yes. Bentley weaponized paperwork instead of fists, politeness instead of shouting, disappointment instead of violence, and somehow that made it harder to explain to people. Naomi continued reviewing files. We're filing motions to freeze Savannah's payout. Blanche looked up immediately. How quickly within 48 hours if the judge approves emergency review? For the first time since the funeral, Blanche felt something close to satisfaction. Not joy, justice. Naomi noticed. Don't confuse accountability with revenge, she said calmly. I'm not. Good. Blanche leaned back slowly. Savannah thinks Bentley loved her. Naomi's expression barely changed. Maybe he did in the only way men like Bentley are capable of loving people. That answer lingered, because Blanche no longer believed Bentley truly loved anyone, not even himself. Only admiration, only control, only reflection. Naomi opened another folder. There's another issue. Blanche almost laughed bitterly. There's always another issue. This one matters strategically. Naomi turned the file toward her. Tax exposure reports, international routing irregularities, deferred compensation concealment. Blanche stared at the numbers. Bentley manipulated corporate taxes through Savannah's shell entities, Naomi explained. If this surfaces publicly before the board stabilizes, Duncan Capital could collapse. Blanche's pulse slowed thoughtfully. For years, Bentley made her feel powerless. Now entire corporations were panicking over information sitting in front of her. Interesting how quickly power shifted when truth entered the room. Naomi studied her carefully. You're calmer today. I'm clearer today. That's dangerous. Blanche frowned slightly. For who? Naomi's lips curved faintly. Everyone who assumed you'd stay quiet. A soft knock interrupted them. Graham Ellis entered, carrying another stack of files. He looked exhausted. There's movement, he said immediately. Naomi straightened. From who, Savannah? Blanche's attention sharpened instantly. Graham placed down the folder. She's trying to liquidate 2 accounts connected to Pierce Strategic Holdings. Naomi muttered something under her breath. She's scared. She should be, Blanche replied calmly. Graham looked at Blanche carefully after she said it, almost cautiously, because the woman sitting across from him no longer resembled the devastated widow from Bentley's funeral. Her posture had changed. Voice, too. There was steel beneath her composure now. Naomi opened the new file quickly. She's moving faster than expected. Naomi looked at Blanche, which means someone warned her. Silence settled briefly. Bentley's inner circle. Board members, executives, lawyers. Any one of them could be protecting Savannah to protect themselves. Blanche suddenly realized something. Margaret? Naomi nodded slowly. Most likely, of course. Margaret didn't care about morality, only preservation. The Duncan name mattered more to her than truth ever would. Naomi closed the file sharply. I'm filing the injunction today. Graham hesitated. There's risk. Naomi looked irritated immediately. There's already risk. If Duncan Capital loses investor confidence, Naomi cut him off coldly. A man committed fraud. A mistress participated in concealment. A wife was financially abused. Her eyes sharpened. I'm not restructuring strategy around protecting billionaire feelings. Blanche almost smiled again. God, she liked this woman. Graham lowered his voice. I just don't want collateral damage. Naomi's tone softened slightly. And I don't want another woman leaving a marriage financially destroyed because everyone prioritized optics over justice. That sentence hit Blanche harder than expected, because suddenly she understood something painful. If Bentley were alive, she probably still would have protected him, still would have minimized her suffering, still would have chosen survival over confrontation. Death removed his control. Truth removed her denial. Naomi turned back toward Blanche. I need to ask you something honestly. What if this becomes public? Fully public? Are you prepared for the fallout? Blanche thought about that carefully. The tabloids, the gossip, the board, the whispers. Bentley's reputation collapsing publicly. Then she remembered standing alone at her father's funeral while Bentley vacationed with Savannah. She remembered apologizing for fraud committed against her. She remembered years spent shrinking herself to remain lovable. Yes, Blanche answered quietly. I think I finally am. Naomi nodded once. Good answer. Blanche looked toward the skyline outside. Clouds hung low over Manhattan while rain blurred the edges of buildings into watercolor shadows. Her old self would have begged for peace by now, would have asked how to stop the scandal quietly, would have protected Bentley's image to preserve her own comfort. But something fundamental changed inside her recently. She no longer feared losing the marriage because she finally understood she lost herself trying to save it. Her phone buzzed suddenly across the table. Unknown number. Naomi immediately noticed. Answer it. Blanche picked up slowly. Hello? Savannah's voice came through tight and furious. What did you do? Blanche leaned back calmly. I think that depends on what you're afraid of. You froze my accounts. Naomi's eyes lifted slightly. Good. The injunction already started working. Savannah's breathing sounded uneven now. You vindictive bitch. Interesting. Women like Savannah always called wives bitter once consequences arrived. Blanche's voice stayed smooth. No, Savannah. Vindictive would have been humiliating you publicly at the funeral. Silence. Then Savannah hissed quietly, Bentley said you were weak. The old Blanche might have shattered hearing that. This Blanche only felt clarity. Bentley confused kindness with weakness, she replied softly. A lot of selfish men do. Savannah's voice cracked slightly. "You're ruining everything." Blanche stared out at the storm over Manhattan. "No," she said calmly. "Bentley already did that." Then she hung up. The room stayed quiet afterward. Naomi looked almost impressed. How did that feel? Blanche thought about it honestly. Not triumphant, not satisfying, just freeing. For years, every difficult conversation in her marriage ended with Blanche apologizing for having emotions. Now she no longer needed permission to be angry. Naomi gathered the files slowly. "We're going to war, Blanche." Blanche looked down at Bentley's letter one final time. "Grace was always your role." She folded the paper carefully, then slid it back across the table. "No," she said quietly. "Survival was." Her eyes lifted slowly. "But I think I'm done surviving now." The first thing Blanche noticed about returning to Midtown after years away was how little the city cared about broken hearts. People still rushed through crosswalks clutching coffee. Taxi horns still echoed between buildings. Women in expensive coats still marched through Manhattan like survival itself had a dress code. The world kept moving, even when yours stopped. Blanche stood outside the Bryant Park office tower where she used to work before Bentley convinced her to leave consulting behind. Hartwell & Reed Strategic Branding. 14 years ago, her name carried weight here. Clients requested her specifically. Executives listened when she spoke. Back then, Blanche Duncan wasn't someone's elegant wife. She was dangerous in boardrooms, smart, creative, sharp enough to make insecure men uncomfortable. Bentley loved that woman at first, until he realized other people admired her too. Blanche adjusted the sleeve of her camel coat before entering the building. Her stomach tightened unexpectedly. Not fear exactly, grief. Because walking back into this part of her old life felt like visiting a version of herself that died slowly inside marriage. The receptionist looked up politely, then froze. Blanche smiled softly. "Hi, Megan." Megan stood immediately stunned. Oh my God! The reaction almost made Blanche emotional. Not because it was dramatic, because it was genuine. No pity, no gossip, just recognition. "You look incredible," Megan said warmly. Blanche nearly laughed at the irony. 2 months ago, she spent most mornings emotionally numb beside a husband who barely saw her anymore. Now strangers thought she looked alive. "Thank you. You haven't been here in forever." "I know." Megan hesitated carefully. "We heard about Bentley. I'm sorry." Blanche nodded once. "I was too for a long time." The sentence slipped out before she could stop it. Megan blinked slightly, but wisely didn't ask questions. "Claire Hartwell still talks about you constantly," she said instead. "She's upstairs." Blanche's pulse quickened unexpectedly. Claire Hartwell, former mentor, founder of the firm, one of the most powerful branding strategists in Manhattan, also the woman Bentley hated, not openly, of course. Bentley never openly hated accomplished women. He simply undermined them quietly. "She's a bad influence," he used to say whenever Claire invited Blanche back into consulting. "She encourages instability." No, Claire encouraged independence. That was the real problem. The elevator ride to the 22nd floor felt strangely surreal. Every mirrored wall reflected a woman Blanche barely recognized anymore. Not because she changed physically, because grief stripped something away. Performance. The office looked almost identical to how she remembered. Open glass conference rooms, creative boards covered in campaign mock-ups, the constant low hum of intelligent people building ideas. For years, Blanche told herself she missed this environment. Standing inside it again made her realize the truth. She missed herself, Blanche Duncan. The voice came sharply from across the room. Claire Hartwell approached quickly in a navy suit and silver-framed glasses. Her expression caught somewhere between disbelief and fury. "You vanished," Claire said immediately. No small talk. Classic Claire. Blanche smiled faintly. "Good to see you, too." Claire hugged her tightly before pulling back. Then she looked at Blanche carefully, noticing everything. The exhaustion beneath the makeup, the tension in her posture, the grief hiding behind composure. Claire's expression softened instantly. "Oh, sweetheart." And somehow that nearly broke Blanche more than the funeral did, because kindness felt unfamiliar lately. Claire guided her toward a private office. "I watched the news," she said once the door closed. "The mistress, the will, the financial rumors." Blanche exhaled slowly. "It's worse than the news knows," I assumed. Claire sat across from her. "Do you know what the most tragic part is?" Blanche looked up. "You were brilliant." The statement hit hard, because Bentley spent years making intelligence feel selfish inside marriage. Every ambition became distance. Every independent thought became conflict. Every career opportunity became neglect. Claire leaned back slightly. "You could have run this city." Blanche laughed softly. "I couldn't even run my own marriage." "No," Claire corrected gently. "You were manipulated inside it." Silence settled between them. Blanche looked out the office windows toward Manhattan below. "I stopped recognizing myself," she admitted quietly. Claire nodded immediately, like she already understood. "That happens to women married to controlling men." Her eyes sharpened. "Especially successful women." Blanche looked back at her. "Bentley always said you hated him." Claire actually smiled. "I did." That startled a laugh out of Blanche for the first time in weeks. Claire continued calmly. "Men like Bentley adore accomplished women until they realize accomplished women eventually notice disrespect." God, that was painfully true. Blanche remembered the early years of their marriage vividly now. Bentley loved introducing her at parties. "My wife built the entire campaign herself. She's the smartest person in the room." Back then her intelligence reflected positively on him. Later it threatened him. The shift happened slowly enough to confuse her. Claire folded her hands carefully. "So what happens now?" Blanche hesitated, then told her everything. The forged signatures, the shell companies, Savannah, the recordings, the financial fraud. Claire listened silently without interruption. By the end, her expression looked murderous. "That man built an empire using your emotional loyalty as collateral." The sentence settled heavily, because yes, that was exactly what Bentley did. Claire stood suddenly and crossed toward her bookshelf. She pulled down an old portfolio binder and placed it in front of Blanche. Blanche frowned. "What's this, your old campaigns?" Blanche opened it slowly, and there she was again. The woman she forgot existed. Luxury hotel rebrands, corporate restructuring presentations, political image consulting. Every page carried traces of the mind Bentley slowly convinced her to bury. Her throat tightened. "I was good," she whispered. Claire looked almost offended. "You were extraordinary." Emotion rose unexpectedly in Blanche's chest. Not sadness this time, mourning. For herself. For the woman who abandoned her own future trying to become easier for Bentley to love. Claire sat beside her quietly. "Do you know why controlling men target competent women?" Blanche shook her head slightly. "Because breaking strong women feeds their ego more." Silence. Then Claire added softly, "But rebuilding them terrifies them." Blanche looked down at her old work again. Campaigns, strategy notes, creative concepts, proof she existed before Bentley, and maybe could exist after him too. Her phone buzzed suddenly. "Ethan Cole." Blanche answered carefully. "Hello." Ethan's voice sounded tense. "There's been movement at Duncan Capital." Her pulse slowed instantly. What kind of movement the board's panicking? Interesting. Very interesting. Ethan lowered his voice. Several investors are demanding emergency explanations regarding offshore exposure. Blanche stood slowly near the window. Below her, Manhattan stretched endlessly beneath gray skies and rushing traffic. Bentley spent years making her feel small, replaceable, emotionally dependent. Now his empire was trembling partly because she finally stopped protecting him. "What do you need from me?" she asked calmly. Ethan hesitated, then quietly said, "I need you at the board meeting tomorrow." Blanche froze. "The board wants the widow present, no?" Ethan corrected carefully. "The board wants the only person who might actually understand how much damage Bentley hid." After the call ended, Claire studied Blanche silently. Well, she said slowly, "That sounds important." Blanche stared at her reflection in the office glass. For years, she walked into rooms trying not to take up too much space, trying not to threaten Bentley, trying not to appear difficult. Now powerful men were asking her to enter rooms because everything was falling apart without her. And for the first time in a very long time, Blanche wasn't afraid of being seen. The boardroom at Duncan Capital had always been Bentley's favorite stage. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Manhattan like the city itself belonged to whoever sat at the head of the table. Dark walnut walls reflected soft morning light, while enormous digital screens displayed financial reports no one trusted anymore. Blanche stepped out of the elevator wearing a fitted black blazer and ivory silk blouse. The room fell silent when she entered. Not polite silence, alarmed silence, because this was not the Blanche Duncan they remembered. This woman walked differently, no hesitation, no careful softness, no apologetic smile. For years, Bentley trained everyone around him to see Blanche as elegant background decoration. Now she looked like someone capable of dismantling empires. Ethan Cole stood immediately. Blanche. His voice carried relief. Several board members exchanged nervous looks. One older executive cleared his throat awkwardly. "Mrs. Duncan, we appreciate your presence during this difficult time." Translation: "Please don't destroy us." Blanche sat calmly halfway down the table instead of beside Bentley's empty chair at the head. That seat looked almost haunted now. His leather chair remained untouched since his death. Untouchable. Like everyone was still waiting for him to storm back in and regain control. Naomi Reyes entered moments later carrying 2 legal binders. Instant tension. Corporate men hated lawyers they couldn't intimidate. Naomi sat beside Blanche and immediately opened her files. "We'll keep this efficient," she said coolly. One board member frowned. "I wasn't aware outside counsel would be participating." Naomi didn't even look at him. "You were also unaware your former CEO committed financial fraud. Today seems educational for everyone." Silence. Ethan hid a smile badly. Another executive spoke carefully. "Before we escalate accusations, escalate." Naomi interrupted sharply. "Gentlemen, the situation escalated when forged signatures entered federal banking systems. That shut the room down immediately." Blanche studied the men around the table. Fear looked strange on powerful people, especially men accustomed to controlling outcomes. For years, these executives admired Bentley, respected him, followed him. Now they looked like survivors abandoning a sinking yacht. A screen lit up at the far end of the room displaying financial structures Naomi prepared. Shell companies appeared across the screen connected by red lines. Pierce Strategic Holdings, Vanguard Equity Solutions, Holloway Consulting. Murmurs spread instantly. One board member leaned forward. "What exactly are we looking at?" Naomi clicked another slide. Evidence of concealed asset transfers routed through offshore entities tied directly to Bentley Duncan and Savannah Pierce. Savannah's name landing inside the boardroom felt explosive. Several executives visibly stiffened. Good. Blanche wanted discomfort. These men spent years benefiting from Bentley's charisma while women absorbed the damage privately. Now the damage had a microphone. Ethan spoke quietly. "How much exposure are we talking about?" Naomi answered without hesitation. "Current estimates exceed $11 million. One man actually cursed under his breath. Another rubbed his forehead anxiously. Blanche remained calm because, unlike them, she already survived the emotional part. Money was easier than betrayal. Naomi clicked another slide. Additionally, fraudulent liabilities were attached to Blanche Duncan's identity without consent. That caused louder reactions. Jesus Christ. Are you serious? How did compliance miss this? Blanche almost laughed. Because that was the fascinating thing about powerful men. They only recognized abuse once paperwork threatened them personally. Naomi's eyes sharpened. Compliance missed it because Bentley Duncan controlled internal reporting structures. One executive turned toward Blanche cautiously. "Did you know any of this?" The question almost offended her. Blanche folded her hands carefully. "For 20 years, I believed my husband respected me enough not to build financial traps behind my back." Silence again. One younger board member looked genuinely uncomfortable. Good. Discomfort meant humanity survived somewhere in this building. Naomi continued methodically. "We've also secured recordings establishing coercive manipulation patterns tied to marital concealment." The older executive frowned deeply. Recordings. Blanche reached into her bag slowly, then placed Bentley's handwritten letter onto the table. "Please don't make a spectacle of yourself after I'm gone. Grace was always your role." The room read silently. One man looked visibly disturbed. Ethan exhaled slowly. "Jesus. Yes, Jesus indeed." Blanche stared at the letter without emotion now. A week ago those words shattered her. Today they looked pathetic, small. The dying attempt of a man still trying to control her from the grave. One executive shifted uncomfortably. "With respect, Mrs. Duncan, personal marital issues and corporate exposure aren't necessarily the same thing." Naomi's expression turned lethal instantly. They become the same thing when marital manipulation is used to facilitate fraud. The executive wisely stopped speaking. Blanche looked around the room slowly. "These weren't personal mistakes," she said calmly. "Bentley built systems designed to hide truth from everyone around him." Her voice stayed soft, controlled. "That made it worse somehow. He lied to investors. He lied to the board. He lied to me." A pause. "And every person in this room helped build a culture where no one questioned him because success made arrogance look respectable." The room went very still. One board member finally snapped defensively. "Bentley built this company." Blanche turned toward him immediately. "No," she said quietly. "A lot of people built this company. That landed harder than shouting ever could. Because it was true. Bentley loved taking credit. But Duncan Capital survived partly because of Blanche, too. Investor relationships, public image strategy, political networking, crisis management. Bentley used her intelligence constantly while convincing her she contributed nothing important." Another realization hit the room gradually. If Blanche understood this much about company operations, how much had Bentley underestimated her publicly too? Ethan leaned forward slowly. "There's something else everyone needs to know." All eyes turned toward him. Ethan looked directly at the board. Many of Duncan Capital's most successful client acquisitions originated through Blanche's strategic work years ago. Interesting silence followed. recognition silence, the kind that rearranged perceptions permanently. Blanche saw it happen in real time. These men were recalculating her. Not widow, not victim, asset. Savannah's name appeared again on the financial screen. Naomi tapped the highlighted transfers. We've already initiated motions freezing several connected accounts. One executive looked alarmed. Publicly, yes. God. Fear spread visibly now. Investors would panic. Media would swarm. Competitors would circle like sharks. Bentley spent decades building an image of flawless control. Now his mistress's frozen accounts threatened to unravel everything, and Blanche felt something unexpected. Not guilt, relief, because protecting Bentley exhausted her for years. Truth felt lighter. A sudden knock interrupted the meeting. The assistant outside looked pale. Mr. Cole, Savannah Pierce is downstairs. Every face changed instantly. Ethan frowned. What, she's demanding access to legal counsel and threatening litigation? Naomi actually smiled faintly. Predators recognized panic quickly. Blanche stayed perfectly still. For years, Savannah believed she won. The younger woman, the desired woman, the chosen woman. Now she was downstairs begging access to a collapsing empire. Interesting how quickly fantasy dissolved once money stopped protecting it. One executive muttered under his breath, "This is a disaster." Blanche looked toward him calmly. "No," she corrected softly. "This is accountability arriving late." Naomi closed her folder sharply. "We should proceed before Ms. Pierce realizes cooperation may reduce her exposure." The room shifted nervously. Bentley's empire was no longer stable. The illusion cracked too deeply now, and everyone knew it. Ethan looked toward Blanche carefully. "What do you want to happen here?" The question mattered. Not legally, emotionally. Because for the first time in decades, Blanche had power inside a room Bentley once controlled completely. She thought about revenge, humiliation, destruction. Then remembered something Naomi said. Don't confuse accountability with revenge. Blanche looked around the boardroom slowly, at frightened executives, at Bentley's empty chair, at the skyline outside. Then she answered quietly, "I want the truth documented properly for once." Silence followed, not weak silence, respectful silence. Because everyone in that room finally understood something Bentley never did. Blanche Duncan was never fragile. She was simply trained to stay quiet. And now she was speaking in rooms that could hear her. As the meeting adjourned, Ethan walked beside her toward the elevators. "You terrified half the board today," he admitted quietly. Blanche pressed the elevator button calmly. "For years," she said softly, "I was terrified in my own marriage." The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside. Then Ethan delivered one final piece of news before the doors closed. Savannah's accounts were officially frozen 20 minutes ago. Blanche met his eyes steadily. For the first time since Bentley died, she smiled. Savannah Pierce arrived at the Greenwich mansion just after sunset. Blanche saw her through the front windows before the doorbell even rang. Black SUV, designer sunglasses despite the fading light, fury radiating through every sharp movement. Interesting. Savannah no longer looked like Bentley's glamorous secret. She looked hunted. The frozen accounts were already working. Blanche stood in the foyer calmly while the housekeeper hesitated nearby. "Should I tell her you're unavailable?" the woman asked nervously. Blanche looked toward the driveway again. "No," she said softly. "Let her in." The front doors opened seconds later. Savannah stormed inside, carrying anger like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "You froze everything. No greeting, no performance. Good." Blanche preferred honesty. Savannah threw her purse onto the entry table hard enough to make the flowers shake. "My accounts," My cards. My access. Her breathing sounded uneven. Do you have any idea what you... Blanche almost smiled. For years, Bentley left Blanche emotionally stranded, while everyone called her dramatic for reacting. Now Savannah lost money for 48 hours and arrived looking apocalyptic. Funny how quickly privilege translated inconvenience into suffering. Blanche crossed her arms calmly. I protected assets connected to fraud. You ruined my life.
No,
Blanche replied quietly. Bentley did. Savannah let out a bitter laugh. Oh, please, don't act morally superior now. Blanche studied her carefully. Savannah looked exhausted beneath the makeup, mascara slightly smudged, hands trembling, fear, real fear. Because women like Savannah often mistook proximity to powerful men for security, until the man disappeared. Then suddenly the protection vanished too. Savannah paced across the marble floors angrily. You think this makes you strong? Blanche remained still. No. I think surviving Bentley already required strength. That stopped Savannah briefly. Only briefly. He loved me. There it was again. The desperate need to believe the affair meant something profound. Blanche suddenly understood something deeply sad. Savannah wasn't defending Bentley anymore. She was defending the years she wasted loving him, because admitting Bentley manipulated her too would destroy the fantasy she built her identity around. Savannah turned sharply. He was miserable with you. Blanche's face didn't change. Then he should have divorced me. Savannah opened her mouth, closed it. Exactly. Because even now neither woman truly understood why Bentley stayed. Not for love, not obligation, control. Bentley liked wives who stabilized his image and mistresses who stabilized his ego. Different women serving different emotional functions. Savannah crossed toward the fireplace. He told me you stopped touching him. Blanche almost laughed. God, Bentley really did recycle emotional scripts between women. He also told me I was emotionally exhausting, Blanche replied calmly. Bentley liked making women feel responsible for his unhappiness. Savannah's jaw tightened. No, he was different with me. Was he silent? Blanche tilted her head slightly. Did he promise you a future? Savannah didn't answer. Interesting. Did he promise you marriage? Savannah looked away first. Another answer. Blanche walked slowly toward the bar cart near the living room windows. Bentley promised me things too once. Savannah laughed bitterly. You were his wife. Yes. Blanche poured sparkling water calmly, and somehow he still betrayed me. That landed, because Savannah finally had to confront the uncomfortable truth beneath every affair fantasy. If a man lies comfortably beside one woman, he'll lie comfortably beside another too. Savannah's voice lowered slightly. You don't understand what we had. No, Blanche replied softly. I understand exactly what you had. Attention, fantasy, escapism. Bentley never truly gave himself emotionally to anyone. He only mirrored what people wanted long enough to keep controlling them. Savannah's eyes flashed suddenly. He was going to leave you. Blanche turned back toward her slowly. No, she said calmly. He was going to restructure assets. The sentence visibly shook Savannah, because deep down she already knew. She just needed someone else cruel enough to say it out loud. Savannah swallowed hard. You're lying. Blanche walked toward the coffee table and picked up one of Naomi's folders deliberately. Then she slid several documents across the glass surface. Trust structures, transfer delays, property shielding timelines. Savannah stared at the pages, confusion slowly turning into horror. He told me the delays were temporary. Of course he did. Savannah flipped through faster now. He said once the divorce finalized, There was never a divorce filing. The room went silent. Blanche watched the realization happen in real time. Bentley lied to Savannah too, not partially, completely. Savannah sat down slowly like her legs suddenly weakened beneath her. For the first time since they met, she looked young. Not glamorous, not seductive, just hurt. Interesting how quickly arrogance disappeared once illusion died. Blanche should have enjoyed this more. Instead, she mostly felt tired. Savannah looked up slowly. You think he used me? Blanche met her gaze. I think Bentley used everyone. Tears filled Savannah's eyes instantly. She blinked them away angrily. No, he loved me. The sentence sounded smaller this time. Fragile. Blanche remembered sounding exactly like that once, defending Bentley to people who saw through him sooner than she did. Savannah laughed suddenly through tears. You know what the sick part is, she whispered. Sometimes he talked about you like you were the love of his life. Blanche froze. Savannah looked genuinely confused now. He'd compare us constantly. Her voice cracked slightly. Your intelligence, your composure, the way people respected you. Blanche's stomach tightened painfully. Bentley turned women into competitions because it kept them insecure, manageable. Savannah wiped beneath her eyes angrily. He said you made him feel judged. Blanche almost whispered the response. Because he knew I saw him clearly. Silence settled heavily between them. Outside rain tapped softly against the windows again. Savannah looked around the mansion slowly. This house always made him nervous. That surprised Blanche. What he said, you belonged here more naturally than he did. Interesting. Very interesting. Bentley spent years acting superior while secretly fearing inadequacy. That explained so much. His need for admiration, control, multiple women, constant validation. Savannah stood suddenly again. But none of that changes what you're doing to me. There she was again, back to anger, because pain often transformed into blame before it became healing. Blanche's voice stayed calm. I'm not responsible for consequences Bentley created. Savannah stepped closer. You could stop this. Yes. Then why won't you? Blanche looked directly into her eyes, because for the first time in her life she finally knew the answer. Because I spent 20 years abandoning myself to protect a man who never protected me. The truth of it echoed through the room. Savannah stared at her silently. Blanche continued softly. You're asking me to continue sacrificing myself so Bentley's lies remain comfortable. Savannah looked away again. That was becoming a pattern. Then quietly, almost bitterly, she admitted, he said you'd forgive anything. Blanche felt something inside her settle permanently. Bentley really believed that. Even after death. Even after betrayal. He thought Blanche Duncan would still prioritize preserving him over saving herself. God, what a catastrophic mistake. Savannah picked up her purse slowly. So that's it. Blanche looked at her carefully. No, that's accountability. Savannah moved toward the door before stopping suddenly. There's something else, she said quietly. Blanche's attention sharpened immediately. Savannah hesitated, then turned back slowly. Bentley recorded conversations. A chill moved through Blanche instantly. What kind of conversations? Savannah's face looked pale now. Private ones. Her stomach dropped. Savannah swallowed hard. He said recordings protected powerful men. Silence swallowed the room whole. Because suddenly Blanche understood something terrifying. If Bentley recorded Savannah, then he probably recorded everyone, including her. And men like Bentley rarely kept evidence unless they planned to use it someday. Savannah opened the door slowly, then delivered the final sentence over her shoulder. You still don't know how dangerous he really was. The door closed behind her. Blanche stood motionless in the silence afterward, then slowly reached for her phone, because suddenly she needed to call Graham immediately. Blanche didn't sleep that night, not because she was afraid, because silence no longer felt safe. Bentley's world had always operated in layers: what people saw, what people believed, and what actually existed behind closed doors. But recordings changed everything. Recordings meant intent. Recordings meant control preserved beyond death. At 2:17 a.m., Blanche sat in Bentley's old office again, the voice recorder on the desk like a loaded weapon. Graham had insisted she wait for Naomi before listening to anything further. Naomi had insisted on legal caution. But Blanche had stopped waiting for permission. She pressed play. Static filled the room. Then Bentley's voice returned. Calm, controlled, almost amused. "I told you Savannah panics too easily." A pause. Another voice, Savannah's faint but real. "She's starting to suspect something." Bentley laughed softly. "Blanche doesn't suspect. Blanche absorbs." The word hit harder than it should have. Absorbs. Like she wasn't a person. Like she was a system designed to take damage without reacting. The recording continued. Bentley again. "She'll accept whatever explanation I give her. She always does." Savannah hesitated. "And if she doesn't?" A brief silence. Then Bentley, colder now. "Then I remind her what she has to lose." Blanche's fingers tightened around the edge of the desk. What she had to lose. Her marriage, her stability, her identity. Her entire life had been structured around that fear. The recording shifted again. Paper shuffling, Bentley speaking to someone else, likely Graham. "If anything happens, ensure Blanche remains legally tied to the liabilities." Graham's voice distant and uneasy. "That could expose her to financial ruin." Bentley responded instantly. "Only if she steps out of line." Blanche's breathing slowed. He didn't just manipulate her emotionally. He engineered consequences, punishment systems. She shut the recorder off abruptly. The silence that followed felt heavier than sound. For several minutes she didn't move. Then she stood, not shakily, not emotionally, deliberately. And that was the moment something irreversible shifted inside her. Not grief, not anger, something cleaner. Clarity. By morning, Naomi Reyes arrived at the Greenwich estate with a legal urgency that matched Blanche's silence. Graham followed behind her, carrying a sealed evidence box. Naomi didn't waste time. "You listened to it." Blanche nodded. Naomi exhaled sharply. "I told you to wait." "I did wait," Blanche replied calmly. "Long enough." Naomi studied her carefully. Something in Blanche's demeanor had changed overnight. Less reaction, more structure. "Then you understand the severity," Naomi said. Blanche looked toward the windows. "I understand he was building leverage, not memories." That sentence made Graham visibly uncomfortable. Naomi placed the evidence box on the table. "We need to proceed strategically now. Those recordings change jurisdictional risk, especially if Bentley stored copies elsewhere." Blanche turned slightly. "Elsewhere," Naomi nodded. "Cloud storage, offshore backups. Attorneys often assume death ends exposure." "It doesn't." Graham added quietly. Bentley was paranoid about digital loss. Blanche almost smiled faintly. Paranoid. No, prepared. Bentley never expected to lose control while he was alive. But he clearly prepared for what happened after death. Naomi opened her laptop. "There's something else." Blanche already felt it coming. What Naomi turned the screen toward her. A new filing had appeared overnight. Savannah Pierce. Emergency petition. Attempting to unfreeze assets. But beneath it, a statement attached by counsel. Blanche read it slowly, then stopped. Her name appeared inside it again. Not as victim, Not as wife, as liability participant. Blanche looked up sharply. What is this? Naomi's expression hardened. She's counterattacking. Graham swore under his breath. She's trying to drag Blanche into joint liability exposure. Blanche felt something cold settle in her chest. So she's blaming me. Naomi nodded once. Yes, and more importantly, she's implying you benefited from Bentley's financial structure. Blanche let out a slow breath. Of course, Savannah wasn't just panicking, she was repositioning. If she can tie you to even partial awareness, Naomi continued, she can dilute her own responsibility. Blanche stood slowly. So she's saying I knew. Naomi hesitated. Yes. Silence. Then Blanche laughed softly. It wasn't humor, it was recognition. Bentley had trained both women into survival patterns that now collided. Savannah's instinct was to protect herself by destroying Blanche. Blanche's instinct used to be to protect Bentley by destroying herself. Graham spoke carefully. There's something you should know. Blanche looked at him. Graham hesitated, then placed another file on the table. This was retrieved from Bentley's private encrypted storage. Naomi immediately straightened. That shouldn't exist. Graham nodded grimly. It does. Blanche opened it slowly. Inside were scanned documents, legal drafts, contingency notes, and one header that made her stomach tighten instantly. Duncan Capital Emergency Continuity Plan. Her eyes scanned the page, then stopped. Her name appeared repeatedly, not as spouse, as risk factor. Blanche read further, then froze completely, because there it was. A clause titled Posthumous Liability Shielding via Spousal Attribution. Naomi leaned in sharply. That's not standard language. Graham shook his head. It's not legal standard at all. Blanche read the paragraph again. Slowly, deliberately. Then everything inside her went quiet. Bentley hadn't just manipulated her emotionally or financially. He had constructed a legal architecture where she could be used as a buffer after his death. A shield, a fall person, a narrative container. Her voice came out low. He planned to use me even after dying. Naomi didn't respond immediately, because even she understood how severe that was. Graham looked away. That clause would have activated if regulators intervened. Blanche exhaled slowly. So if anything collapsed, Naomi finished the thought, you would absorb the liability. Silence filled the room. Outside the estate looked peaceful, trees moving slightly in wind, sunlight breaking through clouds. But inside, Blanche felt something fundamental break. Not her heart, her perception. She had spent years believing Bentley ignored her. But ignoring implied neutrality. This was something else. Intent, design, architecture. Bentley didn't just betray her, he positioned her. Naomi closed the file slowly. We can use this. Blanche looked up. How Naomi's eyes sharpened. This proves premeditated financial endangerment. It elevates the case from divorce misconduct to structured fraud against a protected spouse. Graham added quietly, and corporate abuse. Blanche nodded slowly. Everything suddenly aligned. Savannah panicking, the board reacting, the frozen accounts, the recordings, the liability clause. Bentley's entire system was collapsing under its own complexity, and she was standing at the center of it. Naomi stood. We move fast now. If Savannah files again, we counter immediately. If the board panics, we stabilize through evidence. She paused, then looked directly at Blanche. But I need to be honest with you. Blanche met her gaze. This will not stay private much longer. Blanche already knew that. Scandals never stayed contained when money was involved. What happens when it goes public? Blanche asked. Naomi didn't soften the answer. Your name will be attached to everything Bentley did. Silence. Graham looked uncomfortable. Naomi continued. Even if you're a victim, public perception doesn't distinguish quickly. Blanche nodded slowly. I understand. Naomi studied her carefully. You're not reacting like most clients would. Blanche looked down at the documents again. I think I already survived the worst part, she said quietly. Naomi tilted her head slightly. What's that? Blanche's voice stayed calm, believing it was love. That sentence lingered heavily in the room. Graham looked down. Naomi exhaled slowly, then nodded once. Then we proceed. Blanche closed the file gently. For the first time, she didn't feel like someone being pulled through chaos. She felt like someone documenting it. Outside, her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stared at it, then finally picked up. A man's voice came through. Distorted, unfamiliar, but controlled. You should stop while you still can, Mrs. Duncan. Blanche didn't move. Who is this? A faint pause. Then, you already know what your husband recorded. The call ended. Silence returned. Graham looked alarmed. Naomi immediately straightened. Blanche slowly set the phone down, then looked at both of them. He recorded other people, she said quietly. Naomi frowned. What Blanche's voice stayed steady, and now someone else is listening. The anonymous call didn't leave Blanche's mind. It wasn't the threat itself, it was the tone. Controlled, measured, not panic, not rage, strategy. That was what unsettled her most. Someone out there wasn't reacting to Bentley's collapse. They were managing it. By the time Naomi arrived that evening, the mood inside the Greenwich estate had shifted completely. No longer investigation, now escalation. Naomi didn't sit immediately. She placed her laptop on the table and said one sentence, "We have a problem." Blanche looked up slowly. What kind of problem? Naomi turned the screen toward her. A media leak alert. Early stage but already spreading through financial circles. Headline drafts, internal journalist notes, anonymous sources. Duncan Capital internal fraud allegations emerge after CEO death. Blanche didn't react at first, not because she was calm, because she understood instantly what this meant. Someone is preparing a public release, she said quietly. Naomi nodded. Yes, and they're fast. Graham leaned forward. Savannah Naomi shook her head. No, this is structured differently, too professional, too controlled. Blanche felt something tighten in her chest, the same tone from the phone call. You think it's the same person, she said. Naomi didn't answer immediately. That silence was enough. Then Graham spoke carefully. If this goes public before we contain liability exposure, Blanche becomes the central narrative. Naomi nodded. Victim or not? Blanche understood that immediately. Public perception didn't care about legal nuance. It cared about simplicity. And simplicity always needed a face. Her face. Blanche stood slowly. Then we control the narrative first. Naomi looked at her sharply. That's not how you usually speak. Blanche met her eyes calmly. I'm not who I used to be. A pause. Then Naomi nodded once. Good. Because who you used to be would have tried to protect everyone. That landed quietly, because it was true. Blanche had spent decades absorbing consequences that weren't hers. Naomi turned back to her laptop. We need leverage, something stronger than fraud allegations. Graham hesitated. There might be one thing. Naomi looked at him. Graham opened a file slowly. This wasn't in the original extraction. He hesitated again, then added, Bentley had a second archive. Blanche felt her stomach tighten instantly, where Graham shook his head. I don't know, but I know what was in it. Naomi leaned forward immediately. Tell us. Graham slid a printed document across the table. Blanche read the title. Private Strategic Contingency Executive Compromise Files. Her pulse slowed. Compromise files, Naomi repeated. Graham nodded. Yes. Blanche looked up. What does that mean? Naomi answered before Graham could.
It means blackmail.
Silence. The words settled heavily in the room. Graham continued carefully. Bentley recorded conversations, meetings, private admissions, mostly executives. Blanche frowned slightly. Why would he do that? Graham hesitated. Insurance. Naomi's expression darkened. Against his own board, Graham nodded. Yes. Blanche slowly sat down again. Bentley hadn't just been hiding money. He had been collecting leverage. Pieces of people, voices, secrets. Naomi exhaled slowly.
That explains the anonymous call.
Graham nodded.
It may not be one person.
Blanche looked between them. What do you mean? Naomi answered carefully. It may be multiple people trying to secure or erase their exposure before the archive surfaces. The implication hit instantly. Bentley's death didn't end control. It released it. Blanche stood slowly. So now everyone is afraid of what he recorded. Naomi nodded. Yes. Silence followed. For the first time, Blanche felt something shift again. Not fear. Clarity. Because suddenly she understood the structure of the chaos. Bentley didn't build a marriage. He built a network of control points. Every relationship, every contract, every secret, all connected. And now the system was collapsing without him. Graham spoke quietly. There's something else. Naomi sighed. I'm afraid to ask. Graham looked at Blanche. Savannah isn't the only person tied to those recordings. Blanche frowned. What do you mean? Graham hesitated, then said, There are executives on that board who appear in them too. Silence. Naomi straightened immediately. That changes everything. Graham nodded. Yes. Blanche slowly processed it. So the board isn't just reacting to fraud. Naomi finished it. They're reacting to exposure. Blanche exhaled slowly. Now it made sense. The panic, the urgency, the shifting alliances. It wasn't just financial damage. It was reputational extinction. Naomi closed her laptop. We need to assume the archive will surface within 72 hours. Graham looked alarmed. That soon Naomi nodded. If multiple parties are moving simultaneously, someone will release it to protect themselves. Blanche absorbed that quietly, then asked, And where does that leave me? Naomi didn't hesitate. At the center of it, of course, always the center, even when she tried not to be. Blanche walked toward the window slowly. Outside, Greenwich was calm. Perfect lawns, quiet wealth. Unaware that inside one mansion the collapse of a financial empire was accelerating. She spoke quietly. Bentley always believed control meant stability. Naomi looked at her. Yes, Blanche continued. But control is just delayed chaos. That earned a faint look of approval from Naomi. Graham exhaled slowly. What do we do first? Naomi stood. We secure Blanche legally. She turned to Blanche. Because once this becomes public, you will be targeted from every direction. Blanche nodded. I understand, Naomi added sharply, and you will need to stop reacting emotionally. Blanche looked at her. I stopped reacting emotionally a while ago. Naomi studied her carefully, then nodded once. Good. Then we start. The next morning arrived too quietly. No rain, no storm, just stillness, which somehow felt worse. Blanche sat in the same office where she had discovered Bentley's recordings days earlier, but the space felt different now, not haunted, operational. Naomi arrived early carrying a new set of documents. Graham followed behind, looking more exhausted than before. "We have confirmation," Naomi said immediately. Blanche looked up. "What kind of confirmation?" Naomi placed the papers on the desk. "The media leak is scheduled for release tonight." Silence. Blanche didn't move. Naomi continued. "And it's not anonymous anymore." Graham added quietly, "It's being coordinated through a legal whistleblower channel." Blanche finally looked up. "Who is behind it?" Naomi hesitated, then answered, "We don't know yet." A pause. Then Naomi added, "But whoever it is, they have full access to Bentley's archive." Blanche felt something cold settle in her chest. So it had begun. Not collapse. Exposure. She stood slowly. "Then we don't wait." Naomi frowned. "What are you suggesting?" Blanche looked at both of them. "We release our evidence first." Silence. Graham looked alarmed. Naomi studied her carefully. "That's aggressive." "Yes," Blanche said softly. "It is." Naomi nodded slowly, then smiled faintly. "Good." For the first time, Blanche saw it clearly. This wasn't about survival anymore. It was about control of truth itself. Naomi stood. "Then let's make sure when Bentley Duncan's world collapses." She looked at Blanche. "You're not standing underneath it." Blanche met her gaze calmly. "I'm not underneath it anymore." A pause. Then she added quietly, "I'm watching it fall." The night the leak went public, Manhattan didn't sleep. Blanche knew it before Naomi even called. She felt it in the silence of her phone. No messages, no warning, just absence. Then the first notification arrived at 12:03 a.m. Breaking Duncan Capital. Internal documents suggest multi-layer financial fraud. Blanche sat in the dark living room of the Greenwich estate, watching the headline load like a wound opening slowly. Then another, and another. Within minutes, the story multiplied across platforms like Fire Finding Oxygen, anonymous recordings, internal memos, hidden transfers, executive testimonies. And then her name, Blanche Duncan, central figure in alleged financial structuring network. She didn't react immediately. She had learned that emotional reactions were the last thing power respected. Her phone rang. "Naomi." Blanche answered. "It started," Naomi said immediately. "I know." There was a pause. Then Naomi added, "They're trying to frame you as complicit." Blanche closed her eyes briefly. Of course they were. That was the cleanest narrative. Wife becomes participant. Victim becomes suspect. Simpler. Easier. More clickable. "I expected it," Blanche said quietly. No, Naomi replied sharply. "You expected fallout. This is coordinated distortion." Blanche opened her eyes. "What do we do?" Naomi's voice hardened. "We strike first." By morning, Duncan Capital had officially entered crisis mode. Blanche arrived at the law firm conference room just as journalists began gathering outside the building. Flash cameras, shouting questions, security barriers, a storm without weather. Inside, Naomi already had the press statement prepared. Graham looked pale. "This is moving faster than we predicted," he said. Naomi didn't look up from her laptop. It always does when powerful men die without clean exits. Blanche stood by the window. Below, Manhattan looked the same. That was the strangest part. The world never visually reflected collapse. Only people did. Ethan and Cole arrived minutes later, breathing slightly heavier than usual. "They're calling an emergency board intervention," he said immediately. Naomi nodded. "Good. We need them in the same room." Ethan looked at Blanche. They're asking about you specifically. Blanche met his eyes calmly. Let them. Ethan hesitated. You realize they might try to distance Duncan Capital from you completely. I realize. Blanche said softly, they will try to survive first. That answer made Ethan pause, because it wasn't emotional. It was strategic. Naomi closed her laptop. We go public in controlled phases. Graham frowned. That's risky. Naomi looked at him. So is letting them define her story. Silence followed. Blanche finally spoke. Release everything tied to Bentley's internal manipulation structure. Naomi nodded. And Savannah Blanche didn't hesitate. Include her transactions, all of them. Ethan looked slightly uncomfortable. That will destroy her publicly. Blanche turned toward him slowly. She already tried to destroy me legally. That ended the discussion. By midday, the second wave hit. This time it was not anonymous. It was structured. Legal filings, financial breakdowns, recorded evidence excerpts, and most importantly, clarity. For the first time, the narrative wasn't speculation. It was documentation. Savannah Pierce's name appeared everywhere now, not as mistress, as participant, as beneficiary, as liability. By afternoon, Savannah called. Blanche didn't answer. She called again. Blanche still didn't answer. The third call came through Naomi instead. Naomi placed the phone on speaker. Savannah's voice was different now. Gone was confidence. Gone was control. Only urgency remained. You're destroying me, Savannah said immediately. Blanche stayed silent. Naomi answered instead. You did that yourself when you participated in concealed transfers. Savannah's voice cracked slightly. I didn't know everything. Blanche finally spoke. You knew enough. Silence. Then Savannah whispered, he lied to me too. That line should have felt satisfying. It didn't. Because Blanche already knew. Bentley didn't build love triangles. He built illusions distributed across multiple people. Naomi leaned forward. This isn't a negotiation anymore. Savannah's voice sharpened again. I can give you something. That caught attention immediately. Blanche frowned slightly. What? Savannah hesitated. Then said, I know who has the full archive. Silence fell instantly. Even Naomi froze slightly. Blanche's voice lowered. Who Savannah exhaled shakily. Ethan Cole. Ethan, who had been standing near the window, turned sharply. What Savannah continued quickly. Bentley trusted him with backup access. Naomi narrowed her eyes immediately. That's a serious accusation. I'm not accusing, Savannah snapped. I'm telling you what Bentley told me. Ethan looked stunned. That's impossible. Savannah laughed bitterly. Nothing about Bentley was impossible. Blanche studied Ethan carefully. His expression didn't look guilty. It looked confused. But that didn't eliminate possibility. It just complicated it. Naomi ended the call immediately, then turned to Ethan. Did you have access to Bentley's encrypted storage? Ethan shook his head instantly. No, too fast. Naomi noticed. Blanche noticed too, but neither spoke yet. Instead, Naomi said calmly, we verify everything before assumptions. Ethan nodded tightly. Good. But the tension had already changed. Trust once questioned never returned cleanly. By evening, another development arrived. A private message, delivered directly to Blanche's secure inbox. No subject, no sender name, just a file. Blanche opened it slowly. Audio. She pressed play. Bentley's voice filled the room instantly, but this recording was different, colder, more deliberate. If Blanche ever becomes a liability, I want containment procedures activated immediately. Silence in the room. Then Bentley continued, "She is emotionally predictable. She will resist at first, then stabilize." A pause. Then the sentence that shifted everything if necessary: use her loyalty against her. Blanche stopped breathing for a moment. Not because of shock, because recognition landed too cleanly. This wasn't a fair evidence. This was operational planning. Naomi leaned closer. "This was not about cheating anymore," she said quietly. Graham muttered under his breath, "This is containment strategy." Blanche slowly set the device down. Her voice was steady.
"So I was never a wife."
Naomi looked at her.
"No."
A pause.
"You were a variable. That word hit differently. Cleaner. More accurate. Less emotional."
Blanche turned toward the window. Outside, dusk settled over Manhattan like a quiet surrender. For years, she thought she was failing at marriage. Now she understood something else. She had been succeeding at survival inside a system designed to manage her. Naomi stood.
"We release the final set of documents tomorrow."
Graham looked uneasy. "That will trigger full collapse across investor networks." Naomi nodded. "Yes." Ethan finally spoke.
"And what happens to Duncan Capital? Naomi didn't hesitate. It survives or it doesn't."
Blanche turned slowly.
"What matters now is not saving the company."
Silence. She continued, "It's making sure truth outlives control." Naomi studied her for a long moment, then nodded once.
"That's the first thing you've said that sounds like leadership."
Blanche didn't respond. Because something had already changed. She wasn't reacting anymore. She was directing. And for the first time since Bentley's death, she understood something deeply unsettling. This was never about his betrayal. It was about what she became after surviving it. The morning Duncan Capital officially collapsed, Manhattan felt too normal. That was the cruelest part. People still ordered coffee in glass towers, still argued over stock charts, still checked phones like nothing irreversible had happened overnight. But inside the top floor of Reyes and Associates, everything felt like aftermath. Blanche Duncan stood in front of the conference table, watching Naomi Reyes finalize the last legal release package, the final disclosure, the full archive, Bentley Duncan's hidden system exposed. Graham sat quietly near the window, exhausted in a way sleep wouldn't fix. Ethan Cole hadn't spoken in nearly 10 minutes. None of them had. Because once truth is fully assembled, silence becomes the only appropriate response. Naomi closed her laptop. "It's done," she said. No celebration in her voice. Just completion. Blanche nodded slowly. "Then it's out." Naomi looked at her carefully. "Yes. The entire structure is public now." Blanche turned toward the window. Below them, Manhattan moved like nothing had died, but she knew better now. Something had died. An illusion. A system. A version of power that survived by hiding behind charm and reputation. Her phone lit up instantly. News alerts. Breaking headlines stacking one after another. Duncan Capital implodes after internal fraud revelation. CEO Bentley. Duncan's hidden financial structures exposed. Wife, mistress, and board entangled in multi-layer investigation. Blanche didn't flinch. She had already lived the hardest part, the not knowing. Now there was only consequence. Graham finally spoke quietly. "Investors are pulling out everything." Naomi nodded. "As expected." Ethan rubbed his face tiredly. "The board is disintegrating." Naomi replied calmly. "Then it was never stable." Silence followed again. But this silence felt different. Not tense. Final. Blanche stepped away from the table slowly. She didn't feel victorious. She didn't feel destroyed. She felt cleared. Like something toxic had finally left her bloodstream. Naomi watched her carefully. You're unusually calm." Blanche thought about that. "I think I stopped being afraid a while ago," she said quietly. "I just didn't notice when it happened." Naomi leaned back slightly. "That's usually how survival works." A notification appeared on Graham's screen. He frowned, then turned it toward them. "Savannah Pierce has agreed to cooperate with federal investigators." Blanche read it without emotion. Savannah had chosen survival too, just in a different form. Ethan exhaled slowly. "So it's over." Naomi didn't answer immediately, because professionals like her never trusted endings. Finally, she said, "It's not over. It's stabilized chaos." Blanche almost smiled faintly. That sounded accurate. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. This time she answered. Silence at first, then a man's voice. Familiar now, not from memory, from pattern recognition. "You should have stopped earlier," the voice said. Blanche remained still. "You're too late," she replied calmly. A pause. Then the voice responded. "Bentley always said you were intelligent, just misdirected." That made something inside her go quiet. Not anger, not fear, clarity. Because now she understood. This wasn't random. This was continuation. Bentley's system hadn't ended with his death. It had fragments, residual control, people still protecting it, or benefiting from it. Blanche spoke softly. "Who are you?" A pause. Then, "You were never supposed to see the full structure." The call ended. Blanche lowered the phone slowly. Naomi noticed immediately. What was that? Blanche looked at her. Someone still protecting what Bentley built. Graham looked concerned. "That doesn't make sense. Everything's been exposed." Naomi shook her head slowly. "It makes perfect sense. Systems like this don't disappear overnight. They adapt." Ethan frowned. To what Naomi answered quietly, "Survival." Blanche sat down again. For the first time, uncertainty returned, but differently now. Not emotional uncertainty. Structural uncertainty. What if there's more, she asked. Naomi met her gaze steadily. "There's always more." Silence followed. But this time, Blanche didn't feel overwhelmed by it. She felt prepared, because she had already crossed the point where truth could break her. Now it only informed her. Hours later, Blanche stood alone on the rooftop terrace of the building. Wind moved softly across Manhattan. The skyline stretched endlessly in front of her. Somewhere below, Duncan Capital was being dismantled in real time. Somewhere behind her, people were already rewriting versions of events to protect themselves. But here, there was only air. She thought about Bentley. Not the man in the portrait, not the CEO, not the illusion. The real structure he built around her. Containment, prediction, control. And she realized something quietly devastating. Bentley never saw her as fragile. He saw her as stable. That was why he used her. Not because she was weak, but because she was consistent, reliable, predictable. The perfect anchor for someone who built instability into everything else. And yet, she had broken the system anyway, not through force, through visibility. Naomi stepped onto the terrace behind her. "You didn't sleep." Blanche didn't turn. "I didn't need to." Naomi joined her at the railing. "You understand what comes next?" Blanche nodded slowly. "Yes. Media cycle, legal fallout, financial restructuring, personal scrutiny. Yes." Naomi studied her carefully. "And you're still here?" Blanche finally looked at her. "I stopped leaving myself a long time ago," she said quietly. "I just didn't realize I could come back." That sentence lingered between them. Not dramatic, not emotional, just true. Naomi nodded once.
That's the difference between surviving and rebuilding. Blanche looked out at the city again. For years, she thought she was living inside Bentley's world. Now she understood something simpler. She had always been outside it, just silent. A notification appeared on her phone again, this time from Ethan. Board has voted emergency restructuring. Duncan Capital will not recover as previously structured. Blanche read it calmly, then locked her phone. No reaction, no satisfaction, just acknowledgement. Naomi watched her carefully. You're not asking what happens to Savannah anymore? Blanche shook her head slightly. No. Why, Blanche considered that. Because Savannah had already lost what mattered most. Belief. The belief that she was chosen, special, irreplaceable, and Bentley had never offered that truthfully to anyone. Blanche finally spoke softly. Everyone is dealing with what they created. Naomi nodded slowly. That's a dangerous level of clarity. Blanche almost smiled. I think I've earned it. Wind moved through the rooftop again. Manhattan glittered beneath them like nothing had changed. But Blanche knew better now. Change rarely looked dramatic from a distance. It looked like decisions, paperwork, emails, confessions, systems collapsing quietly under their own weight. Naomi turned toward her. So what now? Blanche looked out at the horizon. For a long time she didn't answer, then finally said, Now I build something that doesn't require me to disappear inside it. Naomi studied her for a moment, then nodded. That sounds like a foundation. Blanche looked at her. Yes. A pause. Then quietly, for women who were told they were too much, until they became nothing at all. Naomi didn't speak immediately, then simply said, I'll help you structure it. Blanche nodded. Good. Behind them, the city continued moving, but for the first time in years, Blanche wasn't moving to survive inside it. She was moving to exist within it, on her own terms, not Bentley's, not anyone's, her own. And somewhere deep in the quiet space where grief used to live, there was finally something else. Not happiness, not revenge, something steadier. Selfhood. In the end, Blanche Duncan's story was never really about betrayal money or even revenge. It was about the quiet way a person can disappear inside a relationship that slowly rewrites their identity until they no longer recognize themselves. Bentley didn't destroy Blanche in one moment. He didn't need to. He did it through years of small decisions disguised as love, concern, and what's best. And that is what makes emotional manipulation so dangerous. It rarely looks like violence while it's happening. It looks like care, advice, protection, even love. Until one day you realize you have been living a life where your voice became optional. But Blanche's awakening is what turns pain into something powerful. Because she didn't just uncover betrayal, she reclaimed perception. She learned that loyalty without boundaries is self-erasure, and kindness without self-respect becomes permission for others to take more than they deserve. The hardest truth she faced was not that Bentley cheated or lied, but that she had been conditioned to accept less while believing it was her role to stay graceful. And yet her real strength was not in destroying him. It was in choosing clarity over denial, truth over comfort, and accountability over silence. That is where healing begins, not when the past becomes painless, but when you finally stop negotiating with it. Blanche's journey reminds us that starting over is not always loud. Sometimes it begins quietly in a moment of realization, where you decide, I will no longer abandon myself to keep someone else comfortable. And from that moment, everything changes. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to reflect. Have you ever ignored your own intuition just to keep peace in a relationship or situation? Share your thoughts in the comments. I would really like to hear your perspective.
And if you enjoy emotionally powerful stories about betrayal, awakening, and self-worth, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more cinematic storytelling like this.